evening, Allen Temple family and friends, and welcome back to Theological Thursdays. We've been on break for the past couple of weeks, but we are back, and I want to come back and start out by saying happy anniversary, Allen Temple Baptist Church, 101 years of God's faithfulness, and we are grateful for a God who never leaves us and never forsakes us. And so I want to wish each and every one of you who are members of our church a happy anniversary. We do intend to celebrate all month long, however the Lord allows us to do it, even though we're still supposed to be sheltered in place. We are going to find a way to commemorate and celebrate our church anniversary month. I'm so glad all of you are joining us tonight, wherever you are joining us from. Make sure you let us know in the chat. There's somebody that's going to greet you and say hello to you and say welcome to you. I'm glad that you are back, and all of the rest of our conversations will be focused kind of in-house on things that are going on with us. But tonight, we would not be who we are if we did not deal with the issues of our day. And so I'm not even going to speak to that debate that occurred. I'm not going to speak to it. For you all who know me, you know, pray right now. Pray. Put up praying hands in the chat, because you know I could be on that from now until the end of time, but I'm not. But there is a conversation that needs to be had. And so I was blessed last week to be able to participate with some amazing theologians, men that I love and respect, who I've admired ever since I've been in ministry, many of whom I've studied, I've engaged, and I was so very honored to even be numbered in a conversation with them. And so we had a conversation on behalf of Progressive National Baptist Convention around voting, around the need to vote. And hopefully if you did see the debate or you've heard snippets of it, you understand why it's so critical. You understand what can happen when you actually don't show up to the polls. We understand it's not a fix-all, but it is a tool that we have. It is one of the 5 smooth stones that was in David's hand that helped slay Goliath. Amen. We got some more rocks in the bag, but we need to exercise the one that we have and believe the power of God to do the rest. And so I invite you to join us tonight for this critical conversation around the theology of voting. And before we get started, I want to echo once again, the census deadline is coming up Monday, October 5th. If you have not taken the census, take some time to do so. Somewhere down there, you should see some contact information. You can do it online at census.gov. You can send it in if you got it in the mail. You can even call. They will take your information over the phone, but we have to make sure we are counted. It is how we get resources into our local communities. So we cannot let our voices go unheard. Again, so glad you're joining us. Meet me in the chat. I'll see you there. God bless.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters across the land and globally who are going to be privileged to hear from some of the finest pastors and theologians and pastors in the United States, many of whom you will know by name. They have been a part of the theological scene for years now that have made critical contributions to the cause that we call Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth the Christ. It is my distinguished pleasure to welcome you to the Progressive Hour, and we're looking forward to talking about a subject that is clearly significant and important at this time. I introduce this hour by asking everyone to look at The Atlantic, a magazine. A new article has just been published entitled "The Election That Could Break America." And the tagline is this: if the vote is close, Donald Trump could easily throw the election into chaos and subvert the results. Who will stop him? A story by Barton Gellum. And it seems to frame for us the subject today, which is, and some may ask this question, why should Christians vote? We have 3 experts here with us today that will help us to unravel that very topic. I begin by first introducing the viewing audience to Dr. John Kinney. Dean Kinney, of course, is the esteemed Dean Emeritus of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology, and he is a systematic theologian who also happens to pastor Ebenezer Baptist Church in Beaver Dam, Virginia. And we are very privileged to have him with us here today. Dr. Jacqueline Thompson is the esteemed pastor of the Allen Temple Baptist Church of Oakland, California, one of the rising lights in our Baptist circles and in the Black church at large. And we're very privileged to have her with us today. We also have Dr. Marvin McMickle, who is the recent past president and emeritus of the Crozier School in New York, one Colgate Crozier and Rochester School in New York, one of the elite Baptist institutions, frankly, in history of the United States, and has really blessed us with making Dr. McMickle its president at the right time. But he's also currently the interim pastor of the Antioch Church in Cleveland, Ohio. And so you can see that we have really a tremendous group of theologues and preachers to help us talk about this very subject, about why we should vote and what our role is as believers in the process. And so we thought it would be a good idea to start with Dr. Marvin McMickle, as I indicated, one of the great pulpiteers and theologians and presidents of one of our institutions. And so we bid you a good day, sir. How are you today, Dr. McMickle? And what can you help us with this subject? And how do we get to this?
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans, and to the PNBC family that is tuning in. What an honor it is to be a part of this discussion with my colleagues, longtime friend John Kinney, and dear and precious friend Jacqueline Thompson, and good to be with them. I want to just begin by talking about why we should vote. And I'm going to begin by making a simple observation. There is more than a name on the ballot. This is not a vote between two men, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or any of the other names that are falling farther down on the ballot. This is, in fact, a vote for the future of the country and for the future of the world. What's at stake in this election is so extreme that the very thought of not participating says to me that people just don't fully appreciate all that is at stake. So I want to give you 4 or 5 things, at least for our panel to discuss and for our viewing audience to consider. First of all, we're voting in a season of a health pandemic, which Donald Trump has thoroughly and completely bungled. 200,000 plus Americans are dead. 16 million Americans are unemployed. And millions more are infected with a disease, the danger of which he was aware of as far back as February, but he did not want, he said, to cause a panic. Well, he caused a panic when he talked about a caravan coming up from Mexico in 2018. He's causing a panic right now when he talks about mail-in ballots not being reliable. So he picks and chooses the panics that he wants to focus on. If we do not vote this time and vote him out, I'm going to just say that, then COVID-19 may well bring down more than half of the country. That's number one. Number two, we're voting in the age of, I'm going to just say this, Breonna Taylor, and a racial reckoning about the absolute injustice that African Americans continue to experience at the hands of the criminal justice system. I mention her by name only because just yesterday, a grand jury reported out that no charges will be leveled against the officers who fired shots into her apartment and killed her, but they did indict a policeman who fired shots into a neighboring apartment where a white person was residing and called it wanton disregard. So from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor to Ahmaud Arbery to the young man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to the man shot in the back in your town of Atlanta, all of these things are being driven by the rhetoric of Donald Trump. Number three, the environment is exploding. We're talking about forest fires. We're talking about hurricanes. We're talking about floods. We're talking about record heat. And Trump is a climate denier. He does not believe that the climate is a factor. 4 more years of that, we won't have an inhabitable planet. So we have to vote in order to deal with that urgent problem. Number four, voter suppression. Everything that can be done is being done to prevent people from voting. I just got something in the mail here in my own hometown. They're changing the polling place 2 weeks before the election. Trump is talking about not counting mail-in ballots. He said on yesterday, let's just forget the ballot and have a transfer power from me to me. He will do everything in his power to prevent people from voting. We have to do everything in our power to register people and make sure that they vote and vote early. Vote by mail-in, drop it off at the Board of Election, and so forth. My last point, and I will stop, is we have to vote with the recollection of who has died to make this right to vote possible. Not long ago, we had on the same day the deaths of C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, both of whom went to Selma, both of whom shed blood, one on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis, one on the Dallas County Courthouse steps, C.T. Vivian, so that people in Alabama, and by that, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, could vote all across this country. Not to vote in this election is not only to put the future of our country at risk, but to dishonor the memory of those who gave so much to gain us this precious right.
Dr. McMickle, thank you. And I think you've given us a framework that we can certainly process and kind of take bites from to further advance our conversation. Dr. Thompson, you've heard Dr. McMickle, and you are a pastor in what we would call a flagship church on the West Coast. And you are also in one of the cities that is historically activist and historically aware, but also historically skeptical of a system that has failed us over and over again. What do you think we should do to help generations of people, particularly the younger generations, to have confidence that not only does our vote count, but our vote can literally help change the direction of the nation? Or is that a challenge that we have not yet faced?
Well, first, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Evans, and thank you, Progressive, for having me. I am honored to be on such an esteemed panel with men that I respect and that I admire. I certainly thank God for Dr. McMickle and all of the points that he lifted up regarding voting, and I agree with most of them. But the one thing I will add is we have to be honest about the fact that, as you have stated, there is a generation who are no longer moved by who has died. Depending on where you were born, depending on where you were raised, bloodshed and dying is a part of your everyday life. And so when we begin to engage the voting conversation, who has died does not speak to them. I believe the conversation may need to shift into how voting impacts your living. Because I believe personally with the death, God rest her soul, of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the game shifted and it changed. We have to echo for younger people in particular that all politics is local. So it's not just about what is happening at the national level, but there are decisions that are going to be made that impact your everyday right where you live. And I certainly think we have to lift up, you used the term in your introduction, Dr. Evans, Christian, and I rebuff against that just a bit, because Christians these days are hard to identify. I think we have to drill down on the term a bit more and say that if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, if you believe in the Jesus of the book that I know Dr. Kinney will speak to us about, then we have a responsibility. And there is a theology of voting to be had in the text, and I can't wait to engage in that piece of the conversation. But while all of this is going on, we have to lift up and begin to have conversations with our younger people, with our older people. There is an entire population that are disaffected. They are not moved by a vice presidential nominee. They are not moved even by the idea of the soul of a nation being ripped apart. What they are moved by is whether or not I'm going to have to stand in a line as a result of COVID to get groceries. What they are moved by is that they've had to bury loved ones past and not been able to celebrate their life. What they are moved by are things that impact them locally. So yes, there is a corporate responsibility we have to continue to undergird, but we also have to speak to this generation, not about who has died. That is important. I echo that. We have to keep that in their memory, but moreover, how voting helps you live a life different than the one you're living now.
Okay, I hear you, and I think I agree with everything you said, because I got to process things as I hear them. How do we get young people? In other words, everything that you told us, how do we translate it into a language where they understand that what we are asking them to do will benefit? Is there something that I could say to someone that I don't know how to say? If I meet someone in their 20s or 20 some years old who has grown up within a nation, has been at war since they've been born, has tried to make us even more of a permanent, social marginalized people, if not extinct. How do we talk to our young people?
I think the first thing we have to do is just talk to them. And honestly, I'm not sure we are called to translate. There are enough people within their own generation that we can bring in so that we can facilitate conversations with them amongst themselves. There are some parts of our history, some parts of our experience that don't translate, just like there are some parts of their experience that we don't understand. But as a peer group, we can introduce the subject matter, place ourselves on the margins, if you will, as hearers, as listeners, as advisors, weigh in as we see fit. But the one thing we have failed to do is to create a platform even like this, where we bring those voices on and hear from them what are the issues and the challenges that they are facing. And I also echo, I do believe experience is important, because the one thing we cannot fail to forget is that every generation has its struggles. Every generation has its problems. And therefore, this is their hour. And this is their task, in the same way that it was in the generations before them, and in the same way it will be in generations after them. But we have to first be willing to have the conversation and take it deeper than voting just for voting's sake.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kinney is a systematic theologian, and we may need to add to our conversation a theological template to further expand on what Drs. McMickle and Thompson have added. Dr. Kinney, it's an honor to have you with us today, and it's an honor for me to sit back and listen to my dean.
Thank you, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to share, and particularly grateful that I can sit with these two esteemed colleagues and with you. I think it's very critical, and I appreciate everything that's been said, and I affirm in a significant way the need to talk about life and death as it manifests itself in this present moment, and that am I in position to make decisions and exhibit behaviors that give fatalistic assent to the death that I'm seeing and making me a co-conspirator in the death reality by stepping out of a moment where I may be able to act in a fashion that in some way that my vote can be a vote for life. And so if I don't do this, I am not saying I'm stepping out of the future. I am becoming a co-conspirator in the type of future that we're going to have. And that future is going to be defined by the very death that I stand against. And I have enabled it because I have not chosen to be active in a process of life. I want to suggest even further as we begin to look at this, and as I talk with church people, and I thank God for PNBC for its leadership of overcoming those dualistic demarcations between the sacred and the profane, and to help us to understand that you cannot separate faith, commitment, and obligation from operation in the world. One of the sad things about much of the theology, and particularly the theology of the dominant European ethos in this land, it has always functioned in splitting. That is, that we separate into domains, and being faithful does not require a form of existence in this domain. It requires a level of spiritual attainment so I can escape this domain. The end result of this is that theology over the years has been primarily where fidelity was demonstrated by assent to propositions about God. So your legitimacy was conceptual. For Black people, fidelity has always been relational, and the evidence of your faith had to be embodied. You had to act a certain way. Our ancestors couldn't understand people who could read a Bible and talk about God and still rape my mother, who could still place chains on my body and separate my family, to the extent that whatever God you're serving, that's not my God. And it goes back to the question, who are the Christians? And I think in this day and age, that investing in behavior that makes us partner in the realization of the future designed and desired by the God we serve, and not the powers of this world, is an act of worship. It's an expression of my fidelity to God. Just recently in Joshua, the 24th chapter, to speak to some of those who will witness to this in a pulpit, it says, choose thee ye this day whom you shall serve. Mm-hmm. The gods of your past. And I hear Dr. Jackie saying that you just can't tell them about gods of the past, or you can choose to serve the gods of the land in which you dwell. Now, the God of the past for many is white supremacy, and the God of the land in which you dwell is white supremacy. Choose ye this day whom you shall serve. Can you cast a vote? Can you make an expression of your relationship with God that requires your fidelity to be expressed in feet in the street, presence at the voting booth, and addressing every one of these categories that Dr. McMickle has laid out? This, for me, and what I'm teaching to the people that I'm called to lead, is this is a decision moment for the future of this land and this world. And will this world move toward fulfillment of God's design? Or will we abdicate our responsibility, or will we invest in that which will ensure its destruction?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kinney. And it seems I'm going to go to you, Dr. McMickle, but I appreciate how, Dr. Thompson, you were talking about conversations and we sitting and listening in that relationship piece. And in respect to Dr. Kinney's theological motif, we're looking at, frankly, an incarnation of some sort, a relational conversation where God is now not the God of the supremacists, not the God of the past supremacists, not the God of the present supremacists in this land, but an incarnation through relationship, conversation, and we setting back in the listening mode to figure out how we can help them help us, frankly, right? I mean, it's not like we're doing all that. They're helping us as well. Dr. McMickle, you have been involved in what I would call a theology that fully embraces the political moment, whether it is now or whether it is 2 cycles ago in a presidential election. And if that is a fair characterization, how did you come to that? When did you discover the nexus? And how can that help us with folks who are listening to us, again, across the airwaves, see the connection where this moment that we're in is significant and critical for us to involve ourselves in our own destiny?
Let me answer that in 2 ways. The straightest way to answer it is that my first job in ministry in 1972 was at Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City, where Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who had died by the time I got there, and Samuel DeWitt Proctor was the senior pastor at that time, and he hired me and Calvin Butts and Bill Epps to help him with that church. You could not be at that church and not feel the connection between the life of the Spirit and the needs of the community and the way in which both pulpit and politics could speak to that environment. So that's the first thing. You kind of breathe in that air. The second thing was my own study of African American church history and the discovery that in the Reconstruction era, between, shall we say, 1870 and 1875, there are about 2,000 African American persons holding elected office in this country. About 200 of them were members of the clergy. None more notable than a man named Hiram Revels, who was an AME elder and preacher from Mississippi. And in 1869, Hiram Revels was appointed by the Mississippi State Legislature, which was the way they did it in those days, to the United States Senate. Mississippi, 1869. Guess whose seat he filled? The last person to fill that seat was Jefferson Davis, who left the Union to join the Confederacy and become its president. Imagine what would have happened if the Black political power of the Reconstruction had been left undisrupted. Think where we would be in terms of senators, governors, presidents, ambassadors. What happened? Voter suppression. By 1890, there were 2 Black people holding office in the Deep South. 2, from 2000 to 2. The result of voter suppression. What we're going through right now is voter suppression. I was a 2008 delegate for Barack Obama when he was elected, proud to cast my vote for him at the convention in Denver. He won again in 2012. Black people, listen to me now. Hillary Clinton did not lose because of Russians. They helped. More Black people stayed home in 2016 who had voted in 2012. If they had come out in 2016, guess what? We would not be facing the destruction of the Affordable Care Act. We would not be facing a president who wants to jam the Supreme Court and endanger Roe v. Wade. We would not have an attack on voting rights. So that to not vote, and I go back to Dr. Thompson's observation and well stated, there are a lot of in-your-face, everyday realities that are on this ballot for young people in 2020. We've seen this movie before. Harvey Cox, theologian of the 1960s and 70s, had a famous phrase. That phrase was, not to decide is to decide. You could turn it around. Not to vote is to vote, because you've given away both your vote and your voice. You can't come back in 2021 and complain. You can't come back in 2021 and say, well, why don't you do this? Trump is doing exactly what Trump said he was going to do. We knew it then. We know it now. We need people who are one of our own community, hence Kamala Harris, and people on other levels of government, in the Senate, in the Congress, in governors' positions, in state legislatures, on school boards, on city councils. We need people operating up and down the political spectrum, from the local level all the way to the federal. And if we do not do that, if we do not participate, if we abdicate that responsibility, whatever our personal motivations might be for feeling as if it won't make any difference, somebody's going to win.
Right.
And when they do, they will do what Trump is threatening to do, which is to essentially write Black people back. Make America great again means putting us back. He's done it. He'll keep doing it.
Yeah. I'm going to come to you, Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, and I'm going to give you like a cue here. I'm going to ask you a Kamala question. Okay. I want to say that, and before we get to her, I'm giving her time to think, what is this man going to ask me? You can handle anything I ask you. And I was just going to say that one of the finest doctoral dissertations that I have ever read was by a man by the name of John Kinney on Adam Clayton Powell Sr. and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. I read that in my time when I was in my studies, and I was very proud to quote from you, sir. I have footnotes everywhere where Dr. Kinney had written on that. And I wanted to, since you brought that up, I wanted to get that in there. Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, I want you to do something for all of us. You're out in Cali. You are a Californian.
Yes.
Kamala is from Oakland.
Yes.
And the pushback against her, even in our community, was the early years when she came back from the real HU and made her career back in California. And of course, she came up in the DA's office, I think, in Oakland. Was it Oakland or San Francisco? But one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And worked hard and demonstrated her brilliance, which no one can deny that. And became the Attorney General of California. But there was criticism in our community now, whether it is deserved or undeserved, about her record with the incarceration rates of African-American men. Tell us how do we get young people to understand when you're in a position, you're in a position. And what do we do in respect to saying we have to work with that? How would you make that case for the next Vice President of the United States?
Well, first, she definitely is from Oakland. We are also members of the same sorority. So for those of you who are
I knew
Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, I have no issue saying that. The one thing I would say, it is indicative first, because I believe we have to talk about ourselves as well as talk about those outside of us. It is indicative of the dysfunction in our own community. The critique that she is receiving is nothing but patriarchy at its root. And we also have to lift up who controls the narrative, because during that same time frame that we critique her for in terms of her record in jailing African-American men, she also made tremendous strides on behalf of the community. But that is the narrative that we don't hear. So we don't hear about how she reopened rape cases that had sat on the shelves for years. We don't hear about all of the reforms that were in place, how she personally advocated for families. There is a reason why that narrative is constantly lifted up over and over and over again. And so I would start with that. But the bottom line is, I think you reach a point in a conversation when it goes back to what Dr. Kinney lifted up. We are at a life and death moment. And the one thing I would stress to people is that your voting at this point is your act of resistance. Everybody is not coming down to the front lines and holding a sign that says Black Lives Matter, even if they want to. Everybody's not going to engage in the way that we may think they should engage and call it activism. But the one thing that we can all do is we can make sure that our voice is not suppressed. And my mother would say, my mother, Deaconess Easter Green, because in my heart, Dr. Kinney, I'm just a church girl. I'm a church girl from the hood that just happened to be blessed and go to a few good schools and got called back home. My mother would say, when I went off to UC Berkeley, she said, now, don't let all that book sense erase your common sense.
I hear that.
And so you have to ask the question, if the vote was not powerful, why so many efforts to steal it? Why is there the moving of mailboxes? Why is there the change in polling places? Why? And so if you just follow that simple logic, and the numbers bear out, Dr. McMickle is so right. The numbers absolutely bear right. There are states that would have been won, negligible numbers, if African Americans and others would have simply gone out to cast their vote. The Electoral College would have been forced to vote in that direction. And so I think we have to look at who's controlling the narrative around Kamala Harris. We also have to deal with our own internal dysfunction. We are critiquing who she's married to, whether or not she's Black enough, and what does that look like? And those are not new debates within our community. The question is, are those debates that it is appropriate and necessary to be having at this hour when so many of the other things are on the line as it relates to the existence and the existential piece of our people? That is where we are. In 4 years, literally, many people forget that our freedom is a constitutional amendment.
Powerful.
And so in the next 4 years, you may have to report to the nearest white person's house for duty if we don't have this conversation at the level we need to have it. And we can see that evidence by this rush to push a replacement for the Supreme Court justice that we just lost.
Well, I'm going to add, you know what, Dr. Thompson, you could have been the moderator because you keep prophesying my next questions. But one of the things I want to say is I have met, I was going to say Vice President Harris, Senator Harris. I've met her a couple of times, and I'm going to be on record. She's Black, folks. So I won't tell you she's Black. I met her once.
And I want people to recognize that when they try and parse Blackness, that is also an attempt to bring division and suppress our voices. We all recognize we came from one place. Now, where we landed is historical. You can do the research yourself. But when we start picking and choosing that if you're Jamaican and Black or Kenyan and something else, that you are not as Black, you are treading in dangerous waters. And so we have to be careful because that is also a big conversation that's happening among us.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do, unfortunately, with our worldview has been shaped and conditioned by patriarchy, white patriarchy, because we do not realize Black folks are Black folks in the diaspora, period. And I think we're advancing that. But what I was going to say is that I met the senator in an airport in Cincinnati. I was getting on a plane and she was coming off the plane. And, she just walked up on me. I said, Senator Harris. She said, "What's up, brother?" And the second time I had the privilege of watching her, and I had it on my cell phone at one time, but I lost the video. That sister can step. Yeah, man. We were up on the yard at Howard at a homecoming, and the sisters had gathered, and she was, not only was she in it, she was leading it. So if anybody thinks she's running any way whatsoever away from who she is, then you don't know. Dr. Kinney, Dr. Thompson brought something to our attention, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Dr. Thompson, and that is the rush for the Supreme Court justice. That's put us in a between a rock and a hard place. And I'm going to look to my elder, both theologically and socially, to help us process what that looks like. Really going back to what I was talking about earlier in the Atlantic, where, for example, that article says that this is a part of Trump's plan. He's looking to stack the court, to bail him out in the Supreme Court, to supersede whether the popular vote or even the Electoral College is against him. How do we think about that? And what do we tell the people that sit in our churches, or at this point on Zooms and webinars, when we talk to our people, how to process the significance of that and the significance that we have to respond by voting? And then I have a follow-up to that, if I may.
And it is so tragic. I even heard a white evangelical preacher say that God caused the death of RBG is so that Trump would be in position to fulfill God's mandate. That those grieving statement here, but what I want to suggest is I have seen nothing in our president that intimates in any degree a level of empathy and spiritual depth. So therefore, I think our prayer, our focus, and our voice has to be toward, are there people on the Supreme Court who may have a history but still have a soul? Who can respond to what they see going on in this country, and they have enough civic, personal, and spine and integrity to say, I will not be manipulated and defined by someone else to the degree that I will violate every principle of the law and justice to support and affirm a behavior that is reprehensible. So my focus has been, and even when I'm talking to folk, is this exercise of raw power. It's going to be exercised. The question is, can we operate now to engage folk who may have some soul left, to begin to understand how and why they're positioned where they are, and that every decision is not a function of a juridical system freighted with fundamental principles of injustice. Now, that's a challenge. There are other ways in which I even engage this challenge this month. I appreciate so much Dr. Jacqueline's sensitivity to intergenerational reality, and I think it's critical for us as a people that the paradigmatic modality for destroying freedom struggles is to divide the people in the struggle. We all go all the way back, and whether it's historical and some people question it, the veracity of the methodology proposed by Willie Lynch on the banks of the James River, that in order to enslave a people, you've got to divide them, separate male and female, separate light from dark, separated educated from uneducated, and you separate them with categories that are not even birthed by our experience. Someone else sets up the categories, and then we pick and choose which categories we affirm. But in the process, we end up ensuring that we will never be a unified people committed to a struggle that can lead to the freedom of all of us. And not only when I say all of us, I'm saying that in some ways, the burden upon us is to set free some white folk. Literally.
I know, man. That's true.
Yeah, do you understand?
Yes,
if
sir.
we can walk in truth, it might be able to deliver some liars from their lies to the degrees. You all know how I teach and what I do. After I give you all the philosophy, first of all, I'm going to take somebody and say, okay, this is the book you read. Look what the scripture says. Then I'm going to go to the ancestors. I'm going to say, look at what your ancestors, find the story, find the folklore, find the testimony from grandmama, and don't use these philosophers to legitimate your truth. Just help them open up something that you can now find the truth. Now, but when she speaks about young people, there's something recently when we tell the story of Samson, and we tell it all the time, when Samson had to go to a young person to show him where the pillars were. Mm-hmm. That's always preached. It's tragic when the elders got to go to a child. What I see in there is a profound revelation about the necessity of an intergenerational response in order for us to pull down the building. In a very real sense. Could it be that some of us who even once walked as they walked have been so blinded by and so privileged by the reality that we have become complicit in its maintenance, and it's going to take another generation's eyes to remove us from our blindness? Mm-hmm. And we have to turn to them and say, show me where the pillars are. And maybe some of the things that we have enshrined may be an extension of the very false narrative that keeps us enslaved. And that's a call to us to step out of some of these categories of division. And I appreciate very much Dr. Jacqueline's observation. People don't try to stop you unless there's power in what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Well, they tried to keep us from reading. Their logic was, but at the same time they're trying to keep you from reading, they're saying their narratives, you're too dumb to read.
Right.
Well, if I'm so stupid I can't read, why you got to stop me from reading? You're trying to stop me from reading because you know if I ever get a hold of these books and I start providing my own hermeneutic and interpretive framework of what you've been teaching me, I will turn this world upside down. The way I put this is, if nothing is ever in your way, if nobody's trying to block you, it's because you're not on your way. And we're on our way. And now we've got to do something to make sure you don't move further. And there are a lot of strategies. And one is to divide us.
That's right.
One is to make some Christians who have come up in the tradition, because Black Lives Matters is saying some things that don't fit with that tradition, to make them the enemy rather than the racism that they're confronting.
Right.
This is our challenge.
Well, listen, our producer is in my ear telling me we've got to wrap this up, and I hate to cut us off because we're really starting to get started. But let me just say that what I have heard today was going to help us not only across the Progressive National Baptist Convention, but frankly, the expertise that's been on this particular panel will help people in the Black church, namely the Black church, in all of the different global perspectives. And if there are other folks who have listened to us from other conclaves, we'll ask you to also consider what we've talked about today. As Dr. Kinney has said, we can see this as liberatory for you too. Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, I want to thank you for helping us to see the relational and conversational piece and how that is a way that pastors can talk across this country, to sit down with folks and reason together and appeal to us to go and vote. And I think what Dr. McMickle has shared with us in his 5 points was critical. The environment, the racial injustice, the suppression, and others. And I think that is also critical here today. I want to close by saying this because I didn't give Dr. Thompson time, and Dr. Kinney just kind of hit on it. I'm a full-throated supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I see that's theological as well. I see that they are giving us an understanding of what some of us from the institutional side may have been missing, and they're helping us to grab hold of our humanity. I want to grieve and memorialize all of the African Americans since 2012, frankly, that have been slain by police brutality. It's well over 110 people now just in those times that have died from police brutality. And I'm going to ask that everybody vote. I'm going to ask that all of our pastors be careful not to make sure you speak to everyone respectfully. And secondly, voter registration drives. And I'm going to ask persons like Dr. Thompson and Dr. McMickle and Dr. Kinney and others, write op-ed pieces in your papers to really appeal to us to go out and vote, and make sure every opportunity that you can, if there are going to be some television folks, media folks, you are good spokespersons to help our cause. We are out of time, but we're not out of discussion. And I thank you all for being here. And on November the 3rd, or like my family, we're absentee voting because people in my family were male men and women. We trust the United States mail.
That's right.
We ain't
trust
trying
the post office.
Ain't that right, Dr. Thompson?
Yes. So some of my closest family works for the post office.
Say that. And so I'm going to tell everybody to vote carefully, fill out the forms, but be in it to win it. And to my AK sister, God bless you, and to my yo baby yo all over the town, we want you to know that we love you all. May the Lord bless you, and may the Lord keep you, and may the Lord strengthen you. Bye-bye.
God bless.
Bye-bye.